Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything is Energy. Welcome to the weekly astrology forecast for the week of June 21st through the 28th, 2026. The theme here is rooting into a new season. And, this week marks one of the great turning points of the year. And that is because on Sunday, June 21st, we celebrate the solstice. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, it is the longest day of the year. And in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the shortest day of the year. And while the experience might differ for where you live, the symbolism is just absolutely beautifully shared. For those of us in the North, summer solstice reminds us to celebrate light and abundance and vitality. And for those of us in the South, winter is about stillness and restoration and reflection. And this quiet promise that the light will always return, that we live in cycles and seasons. And so, regardless of where you're at in the world, for all of us, the 21st marks a threshold. And I have a whole separate podcast that I've done and specifically dedicated to this specific day. So I'm going to keep it short and light and invite you to check that out. And I've done a deep dive into the solstice, and I have also went over a few herbs. Here's one of them that you can use to celebrate the solstice. So let's go ahead and I guess put a pin in solstice, and whether you're celebrating in the north or the south, this day reminds us that things move in cycles. And as I said in the podcast, we used to live by lunar and solar calendars, and we understood that everything happened in cycles and that things happened in circle. And so with that, it's also worth noting that the sun is moving into Cancer at this time. And as sun is shifting into Cancer, this is shifting our collective attention toward our emotional security, toward our sense of belonging, toward our home, and toward our family. So the sun is leaving Gemini and entering into Cancer, and that happens today, and that is inviting us back into feeling, back into the body, and back to what truly nourishes us. And also on this day, on June 21st, astrologically, we have the sun sextiling Chiron. And this is happening just before 6 a.m. on Sunday, the 21st. And it's really beautiful that, the sun's first major aspect as it's moved into Cancer is to sextile Chiron. And as I mentioned in my podcast last week, Chiron is newly entered into Taurus. So this feels absolutely symbolic. And as I mentioned, Cancer really invites and asks us to care for ourselves, to nourish ourselves, and to care for our emotional body. And Chiron and Taurus also asks us to care for ourselves. And, together, I think it's such a beautiful note that they're almost just really reminding us that healing isn't something that we do that's separate from everyday life. Healing happens for moment to moment to moment to moment decisions. And just as we think about what we're learning right now about how every vibration that we offer matters if we're co-creating this bright future, it doesn't mean we have to be super strict with ourselves, but there's awareness that everything that we do is a way to nourish ourselves. And that might be through rest, that might be through food, it might be through nature, it might be through community, it might be through creativity. And so I just kind of want to say that as we begin Cancer season, this is a really beautiful beginning to have a sextile with the sun to Chiron. And that's a flow of energy. It's a flow of energy for healing ourselves and for accessing our ancient wisdom and for sharing our wisdom with others. So the 21st is a pretty big day. The 22nd, we don't have a lot going on. I like to think of those days as days of integration. And since the solstice was something in ancient cultures that people gathered and they celebrated and they often stayed up all night, this is a really good day to allow the solstice energy to settle on Monday. And so rather than rushing on to the next thing, we're just being invited to notice and to feel what has shifted. And these quiet days are often days where integration happens, which is why I like to refer to them like that. On the 23rd of June, we have the sun trining the North Node. And this is when the North Node's involved. This is really about walking our path. This is happening, sun's trining the North Node at around 4 a.m. on June 23rd. And this brings a really beautiful alignment between our identity and our purpose. So, the sun is harmonizing with the North Node when it's trining it. And this is going to create opportunities for maybe meaningful conversations or intuitive knowing, or maybe just having a sense of what the next step might be. And this type of an aspect with the North Node right now doesn't have to be necessarily dramatic, but because the North Node is about our soul's purpose, it will feel aligned. And so what's happening right now is on this day is we're getting a download, or we're getting an inspiration to integrate our soul's purpose with the here and now of what we're doing on Tuesday, June 23rd. So I would just say on Tuesday, just notice what feels naturally aligned rather than what feels forced or linear. Notice what flows and ebbs into your life naturally. On Wednesday, June 24th, this is a day of welcoming the unexpected, and that is because Uranus is involved. We have the sun semi-sextile to Uranus around 6 p.m. on the 24th. And semi-sextile is a subtle opening, maybe a small surprise or a fresh idea or an unexpected invitation. It's wonderful that the sun is quite active this week, as this is the week of solstice and it's entering into Cancer. But with Uranus involved, this aspect is going to remind us that evolution can begin with a conversation. Evolution doesn't have to begin, and even though Uranus is the lightning bolt of change and it's often sudden and we think of it as a big pop, it doesn't always have to be that dramatic. That subtle energy is often most powerful. So maybe it's one new idea. Maybe it's staying open to a new perspective, staying open to a new download. And maybe it's absolute and profound. Maybe it's just something that feels like fun or right on or a new way to look at something, or it just feels better. On Thursday, June 25th, we have a couple aspects here, and this is one of my favorite days of this week. We have Venus trining Saturn at around 8 a.m. on Thursday. Venus is in Leo, and she's harmonizing beautifully with Saturn, which is in Aries. And this is giving some staying power, excuse me, to our creative inspiration. So rather than just fleeting excitement that feels nice but is lost within 24 hours, this is inspiration that has the potential, at least, to become something lasting. So, in that sense, if we're talking about relationships might benefit from honesty and maturity. Creative projects can benefit from really committing to them. And this sense of joy that might seem fleeting is going to feel more sustainable. And we're going to be able to maybe get some, again, downloads or ideas as to why that is the case and how to sustain it. We also have Mercury biquintile the North Node. That happens around 4:15 p.m. And this is a subtle but beautiful mental alignment because Mercury is our mental field, especially in the 3D world. So, as with many things, Mercury, pay attention to your conversations. But also, maybe I would say, because it's about the North Node and we were talking about those uh, soul alignments, pay attention to synchronicities. Pay attention to those ideas or those things that excite you and that feel maybe quietly calling you. We also have the sun active here on Thursday, the 25th, and that's because the sun is squaring Neptune just before 7 p.m. And this is, sun squaring Neptune. Neptune can soften boundaries. And so, we may feel a little bit dreamy or a little bit idealistic. We might also feel uncertainty. Um, that's all okay on Thursday. Sometimes when boundaries and the things that we feel are so set, when those boundaries begin to move, it's a really nice time for creativity and for con uh, conceiving of things in a different way. So I would say on Thursday, not necessarily a great day for making major decisions per se because of this square to Neptune, but I think what's really strong here on this day is to allow the mystery to exist without needing immediate certainty or immediate resolution. You know how sometimes you just want to act because you want to check it off your list and it's been on there for too long and get it done, and then it might not go. So it's not a time for forcing. It's a time for being with the energy and receiving new information by being in the process. On Friday, June 26th, this is really a day of honest transformation. We have two aspects here on Friday. The first is around 9 a.m., and that is the sun is going to quincunx Pluto. Did I mention the sun was active this week? Oh, I love the solstice. So, quincunx to Pluto is going to give us some growth through an adjustment. Pluto, because Pluto likes to, go beneath the surface and see what's really there. Pluto might, tap us on our shoulder and say, is there something that you've been avoiding? Or is there some way that you're trying to control something that you're afraid of? Is there a way to evolve beyond uh, maybe recognizing if we've been acting or not acting out of fear? Same time, this isn't about forcing change. It's about becoming willing to do something differently. So it's not that we need to pick ourselves up and heave ourselves somewhere else. This is about subtle shifts in our consciousness. Just before 5 p.m. on Friday, we have Venus quintiling Uranus. And this is a delightful aspect as well. I love Venus and I love Uranus, and a quintile is just it's a flow of energy. And so this might bring us some creative inspiration, some unexpected joy, maybe just a sense of playfulness or new connections. Do you see how they're all kind of similar? There's that childlike simplicity and joy that is present. So really with this aspect of Venus on Friday, this is Venus reminding us that life still contains surprises. Childlike is the word that comes to mind for me, but surprise can be equally operational. But really, let's leave room for delight. Let's leave room for joy. Let's leave room for having fun and letting that light and that joy expand. And then let's close, with Saturday. Um, you know, Saturday we have it's a day of steady strength. We have Mars semi-square to Saturn. And, semi-square is Mars is gonna encounter a little resistance here. And, where Mars wants to take action and move forward, Saturn is gonna say, pump the brakes, slow down. It's better to refine something. And instead of just forcing and brute forcing our way through, this is about the type of strength that we build with patience, the type of resilience that we build with really allowing things to take their time, the proper time. And then the final aspect that we have for the week is Mars is going to sextile Jupiter. Uh, and this is going to close the week beautiful because Mars and Jupiter work together in harmony, and they're going to bring this sense of confidence and purposeful action and optimism and momentum. So on the heels of the aspect of uh, Saturday. Well, actually, Mars is going to sextile Jupiter. Hang tight. That's going to happen actually on Sunday right after midnight. So you'll hear me talk about that one again. But I think because Mars was quite active with Saturn on Saturday, I wanted to just put it in there that as with everything, nothing is ever stuck and there's no one static way. If the planets and the cycles and astrology and the cosmos teach us anything, is that we're always moving. And it's just a really wonderful time for us to pay attention to the energies. So, where Mars semi-square Saturn might say refine, just to, 12 hours later, a little bit more than 12 hours later, we're going to get Mars sextiling Jupiter that's going to say, okay, you refined, but now go. So it's not like, Mars semi-square Saturn is keeping us stuck forever. This is about just being with the ebbs and the flows. So I guess I'll just say, this week is going to remind us that transformation isn't only about change, it's about cultivation. And if we're living in sync with the seasons and in sync with the rhythms and in sync with the solar and lunar cycles, you know, we're realizing that every season is there's a season for planting, there's a season for blossoming, there's a season for harvest, there's a season for rest. And the solstice at the top of the week is reminding us that all of those are sacred. And then as Cancer is starting, the sun is moving into Cancer, and then you know, Chiron is moving into Taurus. We're really being invited this week to, ask the question of how can I build a life that I can sustain? How can I build a life energetically that feels like home? All right, guys, take care. Have a blessed week. And if you get a chance, check out my podcast on the solstice itself. All right, bright blessings, tons of love.